The blood on Willa Freeman's hands belonged to a man who had tried to claim her as property, and she knew the law would not see it as self-defense when the man in question was a banker's son. She stumbled through the dusty streets of Wallace, Idaho, in the autumn of 1876, her dress torn at the shoulder, her dark hair wild around her face, searching desperately for somewhere to hide before the marshal organized a posse. The mining town buzzed with activity as silver prospectors and loggers filled the saloons. But Willa had no friends here, no family, nothing but the small knife still clutched in her trembling hand, and the certainty that she had maybe an hour before they came looking. She ducked behind the general store, pressing herself against the rough wooden planks, trying to steady her breathing. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. The image of Daniel Morrison's shocked face as he stumbled backward, clutching his arm where she had slashed him, played over and over in her mind. He would tell everyone she had attacked him unprovoked. He would not mention how he had cornered her in the alley behind the boarding house where she worked, how he had torn her dress, how his hands had grabbed at her with cruel intent. "You look like you are running from something," a deep voice said, and Willa spun around, raising the knife with shaking hands. The man who stood before her was unlike anyone she had ever seen. He towered well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad as an ox yoke and a thick beard the color of rust. His clothing was all buckskin and fur, marked with the stains and repairs of hard mountain living. A hunting rifle rested easily in the crook of his arm, and his eyes, startlingly blue against his weathered face, studied her with an intensity that made her want to run. "Stay back," Willa warned, though her voice cracked on the words. "Easy now," the mountain man said, holding up one massive hand. "I am not going to hurt you. But if you are planning to stand behind the general store waving that knife around, you might want to know that the marshal just went into the saloon across the street, and he looks madder than a bear with a thorn in its paw." Willa's knees nearly gave out. "I did not. He tried to." "I do not need your story," the man interrupted gently. "But I can see you need to be somewhere else real quick. My horse is tied up at the end of this alley. Can you ride?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Then come on. We will sort out the details later." Willa knew she should not trust this stranger, knew that going off into the wilderness with a mountain man could mean trading one danger for another. But the sound of angry voices rising from the street made the decision for her. She followed him down the alley, where a massive bay horse stood waiting, loaded with supplies. The mountain man lifted her onto the horse with surprising gentleness, then swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist to grip the reins, and Willa stiffened, but his hold was steady and impersonal. "Name is Tobias Walsh," he said, urging the horse into a walk that would not attract attention. "Most folks call me Toby." "Willa Freeman," she whispered. "Well, Miss Freeman, I suggest you hold on. Once we clear town, we are going to need to move fast." True to his word, as soon as they reached the edge of Wallace, Toby kicked the horse into a gallop. Willa clutched the saddle horn, pressed against the mountain man's solid chest as they tore up the mountain trail. Pine trees blurred past them, and the cool October air bit at her cheeks. She did not look back. They rode for what felt like hours, climbing higher and higher into the mountains. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Finally, Toby slowed the horse to a walk, guiding it off the main trail onto a path so faint Willa would never have seen it. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice hoarse from fear and the cold air. "My cabin," Toby replied. "It is about another mile up. No one will find you there unless you want to be found." The cabin, when it came into view, was small but solidly built, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and Willa realized someone must be inside. "I thought you lived alone," she said, tension creeping back into her voice. "I do. I banked the fire this morning before heading to town for supplies. Should still be going." Toby dismounted and helped Willa down. Her legs felt like water after the long ride, and she stumbled. His hands steadied her, strong and warm through the torn fabric of her dress. "Thank you," she managed. "I do not know why you helped me, but thank you." "Saw what happened," Toby said simply, leading his horse toward a small barn beside the cabin. "Was getting my supplies loaded when Morrison went into that alley after you. Saw him grab you through the gap between buildings. Figured when you came running out and he did not follow right away that you had handled yourself, but also figured the law would not see it your way." Willa followed him, wrapping her arms around herself against the growing chill. "You saw. Why did you not help me then?" "Looked like you had it under control," Toby said with a ghost of a smile. "And by the time I could have gotten there, it was already done. Seemed more useful to get you out of town." He unsaddled the horse with efficient movements, then led Willa toward the cabin. Inside, it was simple but clean, with a large stone fireplace, a wooden table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in one corner, and shelves lined with supplies and equipment. Animal pelts hung on the walls and dried herbs dangled from the ceiling beams. Toby stirred up the fire and added more wood, then gestured to the single chair near the hearth. "Sit. You look ready to fall over." Willa sank into the chair gratefully. Now that the immediate danger had passed, delayed shock was setting in, making her hands shake and her teeth chatter. Toby draped a heavy fur over her shoulders, then busied himself at the stove. "When did you last eat?" "This morning," Willa said. "Maybe, I do not remember." "I will make something." He paused, glancing at her. "Fair warning, though, I am not much of a cook. I can make things that will keep you alive, but they would not win any prizes." Despite everything, Willa felt a small laugh escape. "That makes 2 of us. I cannot cook to save my life. Cannot sew either, though you would not know it to look at most women. I am useless at all the things women are supposed to know how to do." Toby looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his blue eyes. "Then I guess we will learn together," he said quietly. "Because I cannot do much beyond basic survival cooking myself, and my sewing is limited to rough repairs that look about as pretty as a bear's backside." Something in his words, in the gentle acceptance of them, made the tight knot in Willa's chest loosen just slightly. She pulled the fur closer around her shoulders and watched as Toby pulled out a pot and began assembling ingredients. "I do not want to impose on you," she said. "I can leave in the morning, head further into the mountains, or maybe try to get to Montana." "With what supplies?" Toby asked practically. "With what knowledge of how to survive out here? It will be winter soon, Miss Freeman. These mountains do not forgive mistakes. So what am I supposed to do? Hide here forever? For now, you are supposed to rest and eat and let me think." Toby cut up what looked like venison and added it to the pot with some potatoes and carrots. "Morrison is not going to let this go, but he is also not going to want people knowing he was forcing himself on a woman. Might be that if you stay out of sight for a while, his daddy will convince him to let it drop rather than have the whole story come out." "You have a lot of faith in people's better nature," Willa said bitterly. "No," Toby replied, "but I have faith in people's desire to protect their reputations. A banker's family would not want that kind of scandal." He was probably right, but the thought of being trapped here, dependent on this stranger's charity, made Willa's stomach turn. She had been working since she was 14, when her parents died of fever, taking care of herself, refusing to be dependent on anyone. The idea of being helpless made her want to scream. "I need to be able to take care of myself," she said. If I am going to stay here, even for a little while, I need to learn, to really learn, how to cook properly, how to survive out here. I will not be a burden. Toby turned to look at her, really look at her, and Willa lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. Something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition of similar stubborn pride. "All right then," he said. "Starting tomorrow, we learn together. I will teach you what I know about mountain living, and we will figure out the cooking and sewing together. I warn you, though, it will not be easy." "I am not afraid of hard work," Willa said. "I can see that." Toby stirred the pot, then ladled out 2 bowls of stew. It smelled surprisingly good, rich and savory. They ate in silence at first, Willa discovering that she was ravenous. The stew was simple but hearty, warming her from the inside out. "This is good," she said, surprised. "Like I said, it keeps you alive." But Toby looked pleased at the compliment. After they ate, Toby pulled down extra blankets and furs from a shelf. "You take the bed," he said. "I will make a pallet by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Willa protested. "You can and you will. I have slept on harder ground than this floor, believe me." Too exhausted to argue further, Willa accepted. She lay down on the bed, which was surprisingly comfortable, and pulled the blankets up to her chin. Across the cabin, Toby stretched out by the fire, his long frame somehow fitting into the space he had made. "Toby," Willa said into the darkness. "Yeah, why did you help me? Really?" There was a long pause. "My sister," he said finally, "had a sister once. Something similar happened to her, but no one helped, no one believed her. She ended up—" His voice trailed off. "Just seemed like maybe I could do something right this time." Willa's throat tightened. "I am sorry about your sister." "Me too. Get some sleep, Miss Freeman. Tomorrow we start figuring things out." Willa closed her eyes, expecting to lie awake all night replaying the day's events. Instead, lulled by the crackling fire and the unexpected safety of this remote cabin, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to the smell of coffee and morning light streaming through the cabin's single window. Toby was already up, dressed, and moving around the cabin with quiet efficiency. "Morning," he said when he noticed her stirring. "Coffee is ready if you want some." Willa sat up, momentarily disoriented, then remembered everything in a rush. She was in a mountain cabin with a stranger, hiding from the law with no clear idea of what came next. Toby poured her a cup of coffee and handed it to her. "I have been thinking," he said, "about how to handle this situation. And I think the best thing is for you to stay here through the winter. By spring, things will have settled down one way or another in Wallace. Meanwhile, you learn what you need to know to survive out here, and we see what happens." "I cannot ask you to do that," Willa said, though part of her desperately wanted to accept. "You are not asking. I am offering. And before you argue, think about your other options." Toby's voice was gentle but firm. "You have no supplies, no winter gear, no knowledge of these mountains. If you try to leave now, you will likely die before you make it anywhere safe. That is just the truth." Willa wanted to argue, to insist she could manage, but she knew he was right. Pride was one thing, stupidity another. "What would you expect from me?" she asked carefully. "In exchange for letting me stay?" Toby's jaw tightened. "I am not Morrison," he said, his voice harder than she had heard it before. "I do not expect anything like that if that is what you are asking. What I would appreciate is help with the work around here. Learning to cook decent meals would benefit us both. Learning to sew would mean we could keep our clothes and gear in better repair. Beyond that, just your company would be payment enough. It gets lonely up here in the winter." The honesty in his words caught Willa off guard. She studied his face, looking for any sign of deception, but found only sincere directness. "All right," she said. "Through the winter. We learn together, we help each other, and come spring, we figure out what happens next." Toby nodded, something that might have been relief crossing his features. "Deal." They shook hands on it, and Willa felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip tempered with care not to hurt her. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Toby would wake before dawn and tend to the animals. A cow he kept for milk, some chickens for eggs, and his horse. Willa learned to help with these chores, discovering that while she had no experience with farm animals, she was not afraid of them either. The chickens pecked at her fingers at first, until Toby showed her how to move confidently but calmly around them. Their first real cooking lesson was a disaster. Toby decided they should try making bread, something he had watched his mother do years ago but never attempted himself. "How hard can it be?" he said, pulling out flour and yeast. "You mix things together, let it rise, bake it." 2 hours later they stared at a lump of dough that had somehow become both burned on the outside and raw in the middle. "That should not be possible," Willa said, poking the blackened crust with a knife. "And yet we managed it." Toby looked so genuinely baffled that Willa started to laugh. "We are hopeless," she said between giggles. "Completely," Toby agreed. And then he was laughing too, deep rumbling laughs that shook his broad shoulders. They threw out the ruined bread and tried again the next day, this time paying more attention to the temperature of the oven and the timing. The second attempt was better, though still dense and heavy. "It is edible," Willa said, tearing off a piece. "That is an accomplishment," Toby replied, doing the same. They kept trying, kept learning. Willa discovered she had a good instinct for seasoning, while Toby was better at judging when things were cooked through. Together, they started to produce meals that were actually enjoyable rather than just functional. The sewing lessons were equally challenging. Toby's shirts all had tears and holes from catching on branches and rough work. Willa's dress, already torn from the attack, was falling apart at the seams. "My mother tried to teach me," Willa admitted, struggling to thread a needle by the light of the fire. "But I was always so impatient. I wanted to be outside, exploring, not sitting inside doing needlework. My mother gave up on teaching me after I sewed my shirt to my pants," Toby said, watching his own clumsy attempts to stitch up a tear in his buckskin jacket. They practiced on scraps of cloth first, Toby having a surprising amount of fabric tucked away from various trading expeditions. Slowly, painfully, their stitches became more even, their repairs more serviceable. One evening, about 3 weeks after Willa had arrived, she finished sewing up a tear in one of Toby's shirts and held it up triumphantly. "Look, you can barely tell it was ripped." Toby examined her work, genuine admiration in his eyes. "That is fine work, Willa. Really fine." The use of her first name, which had gradually replaced Miss Freeman over the past weeks, made something warm bloom in Willa's chest. She had grown comfortable here in a way that should have frightened her, but did not. Toby was easy to be around, his presence steady and calm. He never crowded her, never made her feel threatened, but she had caught him looking at her sometimes with an expression she could not quite read. As October turned to November, the weather grew colder, and snow began to fall in earnest. Toby taught Willa how to recognize animal tracks in the snow, how to set snares for rabbits, how to read the sky for coming storms. She proved to be a quick learner, her sharp mind and determination making up for her lack of experience. "You are a natural at this," Toby said one afternoon as they checked their trap line and found 3 fat rabbits waiting. "I like it," Willa admitted. "Being out here, learning useful things. Back in Wallace, I spent all my time cleaning other people's rooms and washing their sheets. This feels like I am actually accomplishing something." "You are," Toby said simply. That evening they skinned and dressed the rabbits together, Willa no longer squeamish about the process. They made a rich stew with wild onions Toby had stored from the summer, and as they ate, Willa realized she felt more content than she had in years. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Why do you live up here alone? You could have a life in town, maybe a wife, a family." Toby was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "After what happened to my sister, I could not stomach being around people who looked the other way when someone needed help. Came up here about 5 years ago, built this cabin and found I preferred my own company. Or I thought I did." He glanced at her. "Turns out I just needed the right company." Willa's heart skipped. "Toby." "I know this is complicated," he said quickly. "I know you are here because you have nowhere else to go, and I do not want you to feel pressured. But I would be lying if I said I have not come to care about you these past weeks. You are smart and brave and stubborn as a mule, and I find myself hoping that when spring comes, you might choose to stay." Willa set down her bowl, her hands trembling slightly. "I have been thinking the same thing," she admitted. "About you, about staying. It scares me how much I like being here with you." "Why does it scare you?" "Because the last time I trusted a man, even a little, She trailed off, unable to finish. Toby moved his chair closer to hers, but he did not touch her. "I cannot change what Morrison did. I cannot erase that. But I can promise you that I will never, ever hurt you that way. You have my word on that, Willa, and if you want me to keep my distance, I will. We can just be partners, helping each other survive up here." Willa looked at him, at this big, gentle man who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return except her company. She thought about how safe she felt here, how the nightmares that had plagued her first few nights had gradually faded. She thought about how her heart lifted when she heard him coming back from checking the trap lines, how she found herself watching him when he worked, admiring the easy strength in his movements. "I do not want you to keep your distance," she said softly. "I am just not ready for everything. Not yet." "That is all right," Toby said, and the understanding in his voice made her eyes sting with unshed tears. "We have time, all the time you need." He held out his hand, palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. Willa placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth and strength there, and they sat like that by the fire, hands linked, while the snow fell softly outside. December brought heavy snows that buried the cabin to the windowsills. Toby and Willa worked together to keep paths clear to the barn and the woodpile. The physical labor was hard but satisfying, and Willa felt herself growing stronger, more capable. Their cooking had improved dramatically. Willa discovered she had a talent for making soups and stews, combining ingredients in ways that brought out the best flavors. Toby, it turned out, was excellent at cooking meat, knowing exactly how long to cook venison or elk for the perfect tenderness. "We make a good team," Willa said one evening as they sat down to a dinner of roasted venison, root vegetables, and bread that had actually turned out light and fluffy. "We do," Toby agreed, his eyes warm as he looked at her. The confined quarters of the cabin during the winter storms meant they were in constant, close proximity. Willa found she did not mind. Toby was respectful of her space, but they had developed an easy physical familiarity, their hands brushing as they worked together, sitting close by the fire in the evenings. His coat wrapped around her shoulders when she went out to feed the chickens. On Christmas Eve, Toby surprised her by pulling out a small package wrapped in cloth. "I made you something," he said, looking almost shy. "It is not much, but I wanted you to have something for Christmas." Willa unwrapped the package to find a pair of doeskin gloves, beautifully made with tiny, even stitches. "Toby, these are beautiful. I thought you said your sewing looked like a bear's backside." "It did before you taught me better," he said with a smile. "I have been working on them for a few weeks now whenever you were busy with other things." Willa slipped on the gloves. They fit perfectly, soft and warm. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I wish I had something to give you." "You do," Toby said. "You gave me company this winter, purpose, laughter. That is more than I have had in years." Willa stood and crossed to where he sat. Before she could think too hard about it, she leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to his bearded cheek. "Merry Christmas, Toby." She felt him go very still, then his hand came up to gently cup her face. "Merry Christmas, Willa." She settled into the chair beside him, and they spent the evening trading stories from their childhoods, the good memories they each carried. Willa learned that Toby had grown up in Missouri, the eldest of 4 children, and had loved the outdoors from the time he could walk. He learned that Willa's father had been a school teacher who had encouraged her curiosity and love of learning, unusual for the time. "He used to say I had a mind too good to waste on just keeping house," Willa said. "My mother disagreed, but she let him teach me anyway. Reading, writing, arithmetic, even some history and science." "He sounds like a good man," Toby said. "He was. They both were. I miss them." Toby took her hand, the gesture so natural now that Willa did not even startle. They fell asleep in their chairs by the fire that night, hands still linked, and when Willa woke in the early morning hours, Toby had draped a blanket over her and was dozing in his own chair, his head tilted back against the wood. She studied his face in the firelight, the strong jaw beneath his beard, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the laugh lines around his eyes. Somewhere along the way, she had fallen in love with this man, she realized. Not the desperate, fearful dependence she had worried about, but something deeper and steadier. She loved his kindness, his patience, his quiet strength. She loved the way he never made her feel less than capable, the way he truly meant it when he said they would learn together. The realization should have terrified her, but instead, it felt like coming home. January was brutally cold, with temperatures that made stepping outside feel like being slapped in the face. Toby and Willa stayed close to the cabin, venturing out only for essential chores. The forced intimacy might have bred tension, but instead, it deepened their connection. They told each other everything during those long winter days and nights. Toby spoke of his sister, Sarah, who had taken her own life at 17 after being assaulted by a local merchant's son and finding no justice. He described the anger and helplessness he had felt, the way his parents had seemed to shrink in on themselves with grief, unable to help their surviving children process their own loss. Willa shared her own pain, the loneliness of being orphaned young, the constant struggle to survive in a world that wanted to put her in a box she did not fit. She talked about the smaller assaults on her dignity she had endured while working in Wallace, the assumption that she was available for any man's entertainment, the way she had always been on guard. "You do not have to be on guard here," Toby said. "I know you know that in your head, but I want you to feel it in your bones. You are safe with me, Willa, always." "I do feel it," she said. "That is what scares me sometimes. I never thought I would feel safe with a man again, but I do with you." One evening in late January, as they sat by the fire working on a quilt together, a project they had started to use up fabric scraps, Toby set down his needle and turned to Willa. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice serious. Willa's stomach clenched with worry. "What is it?" "I love you," he said simply. "I am in love with you, Willa. I have been for weeks now, maybe from the first moment you stood in that alley with a knife in your hand and fire in your eyes. I know the timing is not ideal, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I needed to tell you the truth." Willa set down her own sewing, her heart racing. "The timing is terrible," she agreed. "I am wanted for assault, hiding in a mountain cabin, completely dependent on you for survival. This could all just be gratitude or fear or desperation talking." "Could be," Toby said steadily. "Is it?" "No," Willa said, meeting his eyes. "No, it is not. I love you too, Toby. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you never once made me feel like I was less than you, even though you are the one with all the skills and knowledge. I love how we learned together, how you meant that from the start. I love that you laugh at my terrible jokes and you trust me to handle a rifle and you look at me like I am something precious." Toby stood and pulled her gently to her feet. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Willa breathed. He cupped her face in his large hands, his touch infinitely gentle, and lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was soft and sweet at first, tentative, and then Willa wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the pent-up longing she had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Toby rested his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you," he said. "I know that is fast and I know we should wait, but I want you to know my intentions. This is not some passing thing for me, Willa. You are it." "You are it for me too," Willa said. "But you are right, we should wait. Not because I do not want to marry you, but because I need to know that I am choosing this with a clear head, that I am not just running from one life into another without thinking it through." "That is fair," Toby said. "We will wait until spring. See how things look when the world opens up again." They sealed the promise with another kiss, and that night, Willa moved from the bed to the pallet by the fire, wanting to sleep beside Toby even if they were not yet ready for more. He held her close, her back against his chest, his arm around her waist, and Willa felt safer than she had since her parents were alive. February brought slightly warmer temperatures and the first hints that winter would not last forever. Toby began talking about spring planting, about expanding the garden, about maybe building an addition to the cabin. "If you stay," he would say, and Willa would reply, "When I stay." Because she knew now with absolute certainty that she was staying. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because this was where she wanted to be. This cabin, this mountain, this man, they had become home. In early March, as the snow began to melt in earnest, Toby made a trip down to Wallace to gather news and supplies. Willa waited anxiously for his return, worried that he would bring back bad news, that Morrison had not let things go after all. But when Toby returned 2 days later, he was smiling. "Morrison got married," he announced, "to some girl from Spokane whose father owns a railroad company." Apparently, getting her to agree to the match required Morrison's father to pay off some gambling debts and convince the girl's family that the incident with you was just some misunderstanding. "The official story is that you attacked him in a fit of madness and disappeared into the wilderness, probably dead by now." "So I am dead?" Willa asked, not sure whether to laugh or cry. "In a manner of speaking. Which means you are also free. No one is looking for you anymore. You could come back to town if you wanted, start over with a new name. Or," Willa prompted, "or you could stay here with me, marry me, build a life in these mountains. We could still go to town sometimes, use a different name for you, but mostly we could stay here where we are happy." Willa walked over to where Toby stood and took both his hands in hers. "Yes," she said. "Yes to which part? Yes to all of it. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will build a life with you here. Yes to everything, Toby." He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing, and when he set her down, he kissed her with a passion that left them both dizzy. "I brought back a preacher," Toby said when they came up for air. "Well, not exactly a preacher, but a circuit minister who happens to be staying in Wallace for a few weeks. I thought if you agreed, we could get married tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Willa's eyes widened. "Too soon." "No," she said, a huge smile spreading across her face. "Tomorrow is perfect." The next day dawned clear and bright, the sun glinting off the melting snow. Willa wore her cleaned and carefully mended dress, her hair braided with early wildflowers that Toby had somehow found. Toby had trimmed his beard and wore his best buckskins. The minister, a kind-faced older man named Reverend Thomas, arrived at midday. He looked around the cabin with approval. "I can see you two have built something good here," he said. "A true partnership. That is what marriage should be." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Standing in front of the fireplace that had witnessed so many of their evenings together, Toby and Willa exchanged vows they had written themselves. "I promise to always be honest with you," Toby said, his voice steady and strong. "To respect your strength and support you in your weaknesses, as I know you will do for me. I promise that we will always learn together, grow together, face whatever comes together. I promise to love you every day of my life, Willa, and to never stop showing you that you are cherished and safe." Willa's voice shook with emotion as she spoke her own vows. "I promise to trust you with my whole heart, something I never thought I would be able to do again. I promise to be your partner in all things, to work beside you and dream beside you. I promise to never stop learning with you, to never take for granted the gift of your love and patience. I promise to love you fiercely and completely, Tobias Walsh, for all the days of my life." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Toby's kiss was both tender and triumphant. Willa felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. Reverend Thomas stayed for a simple wedding supper, complimenting their cooking and the warmth of their home. When he left the next morning, he promised to file their marriage certificate in Wallace under Willa's new name, Willa Walsh, with a note that she was from Oregon, passing through when she met her husband. "No one will question it," he assured them. "Couples meet and marry quickly on the frontier all the time. Your secret is safe." After he left, Toby pulled Willa close. "How does it feel to be a married woman, Mrs. Walsh?" "Strange and wonderful," Willa admitted. "Like the best kind of dream." "It is real," Toby said, kissing her forehead. "All real. You and me, we made this." That night in the bed they now shared as husband and wife, Toby held Willa close and whispered, "I am the luckiest man in these mountains." "We are both lucky," Willa replied. "We found each other when we needed it most." Spring came in full force after that, the mountains bursting with life. Toby and Willa worked side by side to plan an expanded garden, to make repairs on the cabin and barn, to prepare for the year ahead. They still had their failures in the kitchen sometimes, laughing when a new recipe went wrong, celebrating when it went right. They made clothes together, their sewing improving to the point where their work was actually beautiful, not just functional. In June, Willa realized she was pregnant. She told Toby one evening after supper, watching nervously for his reaction. His face lit up with such pure joy that any worry she had felt evaporated. "A baby," he said, his voice awed. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," Willa confirmed, and then she was in his arms, both of them laughing and crying at once. "I hope I can be a good father," Toby said later, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "You will be wonderful," Willa assured him. "You are the kindest, most patient man I have ever known. Our child will be so lucky to have you as a father." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and fall. Toby was attentive to the point of being overprotective, trying to take on all the heavy work until Willa firmly told him that she was pregnant, not fragile. "I need to stay strong," she said. "I need to keep working, keep moving. Trust me to know my limits." "I do trust you," Toby said. "I just worry." "I know. But we are in this together, remember? You do not get to shoulder everything alone." They compromised, Willa continuing to do most of her regular work but letting Toby take over the heaviest tasks. Together, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Toby building a beautiful cradle from pine wood and Willa sewing tiny clothes with stitches so fine they looked like they had been made by an expert seamstress. "Look at us," she said one evening, holding up a completed baby gown. "We really did learn." "We really did," Toby agreed, admiring the cradle he had just finished. "Together, like I promised." In late February, a year and a half after Willa had first arrived at the cabin, she went into labor. Toby had brought a midwife up from Wallace the week before, a practical woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had promised to stay until the baby was born. The labor was long and hard, but Willa was strong and Mrs. Henderson was skilled. Toby paced outside the cabin at first, but Willa called for him, wanting him there. "I need you," she said between contractions. "Please, Toby." He stayed, holding her hand, wiping her face with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement and love. And when their son finally entered the world with a lusty cry, Toby wept openly, overcome with emotion. "He is perfect," he said, looking down at the tiny, red-faced infant in Willa's arms. "You are perfect. I love you both so much." "What should we name him?" Willa asked, exhausted but radiant. "What about William?" Toby suggested. "After your father." Willa's eyes filled with tears. "William Thomas Walsh," she said, "after both our fathers." Little William was a healthy, happy baby who seemed to love the mountain life from the start. As he grew, he was constantly outside with his parents, riding in a sling on Toby's back during the day, sleeping in his cradle by the fire at night. 2 years later, Willa gave birth to twin girls, Sarah and Emma, named for Toby's lost sister and Willa's mother. The cabin was expanded to accommodate their growing family, and the sounds of children's laughter filled the mountain clearing. Willa and Toby's cooking skills had become genuinely excellent by then, and their table was always full of delicious, nourishing food. Their sewing was expert level, all their clothes and household linens beautifully made. They had learned together, just as Toby had promised that first night, and in the learning, they had built a life richer than either of them had dreamed possible. The children grew strong and capable, learning the ways of the mountains from their father and the love of learning from their mother. William became an expert tracker by the time he was 10. Sarah had her father's gentle strength and her mother's fierce independence. Emma inherited Willa's sharp mind and Toby's patience. Sometimes, lying in bed at night with Toby's arms around her and their children sleeping peacefully nearby, Willa would think back to that desperate flight through Wallace's streets, blood on her hands and terror in her heart. It seemed like another lifetime, another person. "What are you thinking about?" Toby would ask, sensing her wakefulness. "How grateful I am," she would say. "How a day that started as the worst of my life led me to the best." "I am the grateful one," Toby would reply. "You could have ended up anywhere with anyone. I am thankful every day that you ended up here with me." On their 10th wedding anniversary, Toby surprised Willa by taking her back down the mountain to Wallace. The town had grown significantly, and no one recognized the confident, capable woman in well-made traveling clothes as the desperate girl who had fled a decade before. They stayed in the hotel, had dinner at the nicest restaurant, and Toby bought Willa a beautiful shawl from the general store. "I can buy my own shawl now, you know," Willa teased. They had started selling some of Willa's sewing work and Toby's furs in town, making a tidy profit. "We are not exactly poor anymore." "I know," Toby said, "but I wanted to buy it for you anyway. 10 years ago, I promised to take care of you, and I like keeping that promise." "You have kept every promise you ever made me," Willa said softly. "Every single one." They walked past the alley where it had all started, and Willa felt nothing but a distant gratitude for the events that had brought her to Toby. The fear and trauma had faded over the years, healed by love and safety and purpose. At the hotel that night, lying in an actual bed with real sheets, Toby pulled Willa close. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Staying on the mountain, living so remotely, you could have had an easier life." "Easier," Willa laughed. "Maybe better, never. What we have built together, it is extraordinary, Toby. We learned together, grew together, created a family and a home together. I would not trade a single moment of it. Not even the time I set the kitchen on fire trying to make you a birthday cake," Toby asked with a grin. "Especially not that," Willa said, giggling at the memory. "Or the time I sewed your pants' legs together while trying to patch them." "We have had quite a journey," Toby said. "The best journey," Willa agreed. They returned to the mountain the next day, to their children and their cabin and their life. William had kept everything running smoothly in their absence, proving that at 12, he was already capable and responsible. The twins, now 8, had made a cake to welcome them home, slightly lopsided but delicious. The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations. William grew into a fine young man, as tall as his father and just as kind. He married a girl from a neighboring valley, a clever young woman named Grace, who took immediately to mountain life. They built their own cabin nearby, and soon Willa and Toby were grandparents to a boisterous grandson. Sarah decided she wanted to be a teacher and went down to Spokane for training, returning to establish a small school in Wallace that served the children of miners and loggers. Emma stayed on the mountain, developing a talent for healing and herbs that made her sought after throughout the region. Through it all, Toby and Willa remained each other's anchor and joy. They still learned together, now teaching their children and grandchildren the skills they had once struggled to master. They still laughed together over kitchen mishaps and sewing mistakes, though these were rare now. They still held each other close at night and marveled at the life they had built. One evening, when Willa was 55 and Toby 57, they sat on the porch of their expanded cabin watching the sun set over the mountains. Their hands were linked as always, their fingers intertwined in the easy intimacy of decades together. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Willa asked. "When I told you I could not cook or sew." "I said we would learn together," Toby replied, his voice still strong despite the gray in his beard. "We did more than learn," Willa said. "We built an entire life together. We created something beautiful out of what started as desperation and fear." "We did," Toby agreed. "And I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. All of it, as long as it was with you." Willa leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable and content. Below them in the valley, she could see the lights beginning to glow in William's cabin. Beyond that, the mountains stretched endlessly, wild and beautiful, the setting for their extraordinary love story. "I love you, Tobias Walsh," she said. "I love you, Willa Walsh," he replied. And as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, they sat together in perfect peace. Two people who had learned together, loved together, and built a life together that exceeded anything either of them had imagined possible on that desperate day in Wallace so many years before. The seasons turned, and their love remained constant. Through harsh winters and beautiful springs, through challenges and triumphs, through the raising of children and the welcoming of grandchildren, Toby and Willa faced it all together, their partnership as strong in their later years as it had been in their first days together. When Toby was 60, he built a large dining table to accommodate their growing family. Every Sunday, weather permitting, the whole family gathered at the original cabin for dinner. William and Grace came with their 3 children. Sarah brought her husband, a shopkeeper from Wallace, and their 2 daughters. Emma, still unmarried but happy in her healing work, never missed a gathering. The cabin rang with laughter and conversation, and Willa would stand at the stove, cooking with the skill of decades of practice, and feel her heart swell with gratitude. This family, this love, this life, it had all grown from that one act of kindness when Toby had offered her a way out of Wallace. "Penny for your thoughts," Toby would say, coming up behind her to slip his arms around her waist. "Just thinking about how blessed we are," Willa would reply, leaning back against him. "Every day," Toby would agree. "Every single day." Their grandchildren loved hearing the story of how their grandparents met, though Willa and Toby kept the darker details to themselves, focusing instead on the learning and the laughter. Grandma really did not know how to cook. Little Thomas, William's eldest, would ask in disbelief, watching Willa turn out perfect pies and roasts. "Not even a little bit," Willa would confirm with a smile, and Grandpa could not sew. "His stitches looked like they were made by a drunken bear," Toby would say, making the children giggle. "But you learned together," Sarah's eldest daughter Lily would say dreamily. "That is so romantic." "It is," Willa would agree, meeting Toby's eyes across the room. "It really is." As they moved into their 60s and then 70s, Toby and Willa gradually slowed down, but they never stopped learning, never stopped growing together. They learned to navigate the aches and pains of aging, supporting each other through illnesses and injuries. They learned to appreciate the quieter pleasures, the simple joy of sitting together on the porch, holding hands and watching the world go by. William took over more of the heavy work around the cabin, but Toby still insisted on doing his share, stubborn as ever. Willa still tended her garden, though Emma helped now with the harvesting. They still cooked together, their movements in the kitchen a practiced dance of decades. They still sewed together, making quilts for new grandbabies and great-grandbabies. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. The original cabin could not hold them all anymore, so they set up tables outside under the pines. Willa looked around at the sea of faces, all the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren they had been blessed with, and felt tears of joy streaming down her face. "We did good," Toby whispered in her ear. "We did better than good," Willa replied. "We did magnificent." That night, after everyone had gone home or settled into various sleeping spots around the property, Toby and Willa lay in their bed, the same bed where they had shared their first night as husband and wife 4 decades before. "You know what the secret is?" Willa asked. "To 40 years of happy marriage." "What?" Toby asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Meaning it when you say you will learn together. Never thinking you know everything, never being too proud to admit you need help, always being willing to try something new. We learned to cook and sew together, but we also learned to be parents together, to be partners together, to navigate every stage of life together." "You are right," Toby said thoughtfully. "I think that is why we work so well. We never put the burden of knowledge or skill all on one person. We always shared it. We always will," Willa said. Toby kissed her forehead. "Always," he agreed. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and outside the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, silent witnesses to the extraordinary love that had bloomed in this remote clearing. Toby lived to be 82, Willa to 80. They passed within 6 months of each other, Toby first, slipping away peacefully in his sleep after a long, full life. Willa followed soon after, her children said, because she could not bear to be without him. They were buried side by side on the mountain they had loved, under a simple stone that read, "Tobias and Willa Walsh." They learned together, loved together, lived together. Their children and grandchildren continued to gather at the cabin for years after, keeping the tradition alive, telling the story of the mountain man who saved a desperate woman and the life they built together. The cabin itself was maintained lovingly, a shrine to the power of partnership and love. The story of Toby and Willa became a legend in the mountains of Idaho, a tale told to young couples starting out, a reminder that the best partnerships are built not on what you already know, but on the willingness to learn together, to grow together, to face the unknown hand in hand. Their legacy lived on in their descendants, in the skills they had mastered and passed down, in the love they had modeled, and in the simple truth that sometimes the best response to "I cannot" is not "then let me," but "then we will learn together."